Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Goldie Steiner. I'm founder and co-chair of Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights. I'm joined by our partners, Andrea Spindle, Executive Director of Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation. Also, Lance Davis, Executive Director of JNF Canada. My personal hello to our distinguished guest, whom I had the pleasure of meeting over a decade ago as then chairman of World Likud. Later we met in San Remo as our special guest commemorating the 90th anniversary of the San Remo resolution. I also had the distinct honor of attending your son Aviam's bar mitzvah, and so on and so forth. You were Danny at the time, but today you are a rising star on the Israeli political stage, and knowing you, the sky is the limit. Wishing you Hazak ve'ematz. And now we bring you a short dynamic video introducing you to some of Ambassador Danny Danon's achievements, and then we'll listen to his presentation, following which Andrea will ask some questions, and Lance will thank the ambassador and wrap up. Take it away.
No UNESCO declaration, no empty speeches, no General Assembly resolution will ever drive us from Jerusalem.
ולשופט גולדסטון אני בא ואומר, אנחנו לא מקבלים את הדוח הזה.
Why should Americans be concerned that Iran will take this to the next level?
Look what Iran did in the past. They sponsored terrorism all over the world.
למלא באמונה את תפקידי כחבר הממשלה ולקיים את החלטות הכנסת.
It's got to be one of the toughest arenas to defend Israel in, and the man currently taking on that challenge, Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon.
Despite the rising voices of anti-Semitism, today the reality is different. Today we have the state of Israel. Use this opportunity to start direct negotiations. If President Abbas was serious about negotiating, he wouldn't be here in New York. He would be in Jerusalem. This is a deed to our land. In this aerial photo that we are revealing today for the first time, you can see the complete transformation of this village into a terror terminal. Jerusalem is our capital for 3,000 years, and no UN resolution can deny our connection to our eternal capital.
Wow, you just said a mouthful there. That was chilling, Ambassador.
We welcome the involvement not only of the US, but other international players, even some of the moderate Arab countries, but you need the Palestinians to be on board. And unfortunately, they prefer to go to France to come to the UN, but not to sit down and negotiate with us.
תהילים. אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן. אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. We will keep fighting until anti-Semitism is finally defeated. עם ישראל חי.
Ambassador, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Goldie. Thank you, Lance, Andrea. I have so many friends joining us. I wish we could do it in person. I know many of you are eager to come to visit us here in Jerusalem, and I hope we'll be able to do it in the very near future. As Goldie Steiner, my dear friend, mentioned, we speak a lot about our rights, and we do a lot. And I want to thank all of you for putting it in the front line. And today we see that what we spoke about a decade ago, today it's becoming a reality. The discussion about sovereignty, about our rights to the land, it's something we should be very proud about reaching the level of discussions and actions where we are today. Also, I want to share with you some of my experiences at the UN and have a dialogue with you today. But I found out that when we speak about our rights, we get the respect. And you will be surprised to hear that we get the respect mainly from the Muslim ambassadors and the Muslim leaders. And during my speeches in the Security Council, the feedback I got from some of the Muslim leaders, it wasn't public back then, but it was amazing for me. They told me, we understand you respect history, you respect your religion, you respect your presence in the land of Israel, and we want to hear more about that. So this is the kind of approach we have to adapt, is not to be apologetic, not to be defending ourselves all the time. On the contrary, to be on the attack and to demand what is ours. And I stressed, and I do it today also, and I did it in the past, and I will do it in the future, to speak about our rights and not to apologize about only security issues or political situation. And when I speak about rights, I speak about three pillars. First is the biblical rights to the land. You don't have to be religious. You don't have to be Jewish. You can be Muslim or Christian or Jewish. But when you read the Bible, you see that we have rights to the land. It is our deed to the land. No one can argue about that. And I challenge them to prove me wrong. So some will argue, yeah, but we're dealing with international law. How can you go back to the Bible? And I say, this is the oldest document there is. If you can challenge it, show me something different. And it is effective. But if it is not enough for you, let's speak about the second pillar, which is the historical rights to the land. And you cannot argue with history. You can walk in the streets of Rome and see the evidence in the gate of Titus yourself. And when I took Ambassador Nikki Haley for her first visit to Israel, and I explained her about our rights to the land, it was her first time in Israel, I gave her a gift. I gave her a book of Mark Twain that was published in 1869. It's called The Innocents Abroad, a great book, very funny book. But when you read the book, you understand that actually back then in 1869, Israel was empty, and you had small presence of poor Jewish communities that stayed in Tiberias, in Jerusalem, in Tzfat, and that's it. So no one can come and claim that they were there before us. So it's not coming from a Jewish perspective, a biblical perspective, it's facts. And when you walk in the city of David, you can go back thousands of years ago and see the connection of Jews to the ancient land of Jerusalem. And if those two pillars are not enough, we get to the issue of international law. And that's something, we discussed a lot, and I know that you are dealing with that, and I think it's very important to speak up. And when you speak about international law, we should not be apologetic. We have all the documents and all the legal case about our rights according to international law. We go back to Balfour Declaration, 1917, to the San Remo conference, where, I still remember the great event we held there, and actually we were supposed to be there to celebrate again, but we couldn't do it because of the corona. But this is the basic of our rights, legal rights. And then when you go to the Charter of the UN, the UN actually adapted all the previous agreements, including San Remo, Balfour Declaration, and adapted them. So basically the UN, the very organization that speaks against us and say that we are violating international law, quote unquote, basically the UN Charter gives us the legal rights to the land. So when you put it all in perspective and you defend it, you make the case for Israel. And that's what I did in the last 5 years. And I can tell you it was very effective. And we were able to change the perspective and also the way some of the countries vote about those issues. And in order to get their hearts and votes, the approach I adopted included 3 major parts. First, it was to be a proud Jew. I wasn't ashamed of my Jewishness. So we brought Judaism into the halls of the UN. We celebrated our Jewish holidays. We got kosher food to the cafeterias. I was very proud to put my yarmulke whenever I quoted from the Bible. And they understood that Judaism is nothing to hide. On the contrary, we're very proud of our Judaism, and we got the respect for that. The second part was to bring Israel to the UN. We brought many, many guests and speakers and experts to show what we have and what we can do to help other countries, and to bring the UN to Israel. And that's what we did. I took more than 100 UN ambassadors with me, special delegations, and it was amazing to see their reaction when they actually walked in the old city of Jerusalem. And they understood, only when they actually came with me to Israel, they understood that if they deny the connection of the Jewish people to Jerusalem, they deny the connection of Christians to Jerusalem. And before that, when I was trying to speak about it, they told me, Danny, you know, it's always like that. Why should we even bother to change the language? But when they actually understood it, it changed their perspective. And many of those ambassadors moved on, became a head of state, ministers of foreign affairs. And for me, it was a great experience to explain them our point of view in Israel. The third part, which I think we can do more and we should do more, is technology and innovation. And we have a lot of knowledge, and Lance is here with us. We know about JNF work in terms of water and desalination and agriculture. And I can tell you that they care about those issues much more than issues that we care about, like security. And when I came back to New York and I had a reflection about the tour with my colleagues, and I was sure that they would speak about the highlights of the trip, and they would tell me about meeting the prime minister, the president, taking helicopters to the Golan Heights. But for them, it wasn't the highlight. For me, it was the highlight. For them, they told me, Danny, we were very excited about the drip irrigation and the water desalination in Ashkelon, and the way you actually grow mangoes and bananas. So we have to understand that today, most countries, they care about sustainable development. They care about issues like water, food security, health for sure. So those are the issues we can do more, and we have to do more in order to get their attention and in order to facilitate the bilateral relations. Before I open the discussion, I want to say one word about the upcoming agreement with the UAE. We collaborated with the UAE in the past at the UN. I was personally involved in many activities and initiatives. Personally, I also had the pleasure to visit the UAE in an official visit, and I think there's an opportunity to do much more with those countries. We have a common enemy, which is Iran, and I think the JCPOA, the Iran deal, which is a bad agreement, one good thing came out of it, that it brought us together, the moderate Arab countries and Israel, and hopefully we will see more countries joining and recognizing Israel. When you look at the numbers, we have 193 countries at the UN. Today we have bilateral relations with 160, more than 160. And I hope in the near future, the next few weeks, we will be able to announce about more countries recognizing Israel and opening bilateral relations. So I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic about where we are today. I'm optimistic about us changing the way we speak about our rights to the land. I want to remind you, Goldie, we know in the past we dealt with ideas about people talking about different solutions, and today most Israelis understanding that we have to speak about our rights, defend our rights, and from the point of strength, we can actually achieve peace. So I want to thank you for supporting me during my time at the UN and my time in the Knesset, and I'm sure we will continue to do great things together in the future.
Thank you, Ambassador. We are delighted to talk to an unapologetic Zionist, which is the theme that our organization is promoting and encouraging people to stand as proud Jews and proud Zionists, and you are an icon for that, so thank you. I do have a few questions. We're wondering whether the compromise, if it is that Israel has made in order to have normalization with UAE is too much or will be moderated later, and that is the ability to extend sovereignty, support needed to extend sovereignty over parts of Judea and Samaria. Do you think it will happen, or is it off the table?
So first, I want to remind us all that when I spoke about sovereignty 10 years ago in the Israeli parliament, in the Knesset, people looked at me and they said, this guy is not connected to reality. How do you even bring this issue to the table? And look where we are today. It's on the table. President Trump spoke about it. He was part of the campaign, and I'm committed to continue to push it forward. And I would stress one point, and I wrote about it in the book I published about 10 years ago, Israel, the Will to Prevail. And the main point in my book was that we have to do what's good for Israel and not listen to our allies in the US. And I know it's hard. It's not diplomatic. It's not politically correct. But when you look at history, and I proved it in my book, when we listen to our friends from the US, we paid a heavy price. Whether it was Golda Meir, who made a huge mistake in Yom Kippur because Henry Kissinger pressured her, and we paid with the lives of more than 2,000 soldiers. And when you look on the brave decisions of our prime ministers, whether it's Menachem Begin, who attacked the reactor in Iraq, whether it's Ehud Olmert, which I don't support and I don't agree with his policy, but I give him credit for attacking the nuclear reactor in Syria. And actually, if you read the memoir of President Bush II, he writes about that he called Prime Minister Olmert, and he told him that he should not attack the reactor in Syria. And we didn't listen to the US, we attacked the reactor. And after that, Bush told his staff that now he appreciates the Israelis even more because it was the right thing to do. And same goes with sovereignty. When Prime Minister Menachem Begin applied sovereignty over the Golan Heights in 1981, Israel was condemned by the UN, by the US. President Reagan, he was furious about that. But look where we are today. The US is recognizing our presence, our sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and it is an important part of our land. It is a buffer between the radicals in Syria and the Galilee. So we should look in the long run. And I think that's why we have to apply sovereignty. First, we have the legal rights, and also we have to determine our eastern border with Jordan. And I think, it's still on the table. We will have to continue to push for that.
Thank you. How important is it that other countries, besides the US, recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and move their embassy? Will normalization with the UAE give you the opportunity to see an Arab embassy in Jerusalem?
So it will take time to see Arab embassy in Jerusalem, but I want to bring you back, Andrea, to 2 years ago. I was at the UN with Ambassador Nikki Haley, and we were dealing with the pushback after President Trump announced about the movement of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And many, many leaders, Muslim leaders and European leaders, they threatened President Trump and Israel that if it will happen, then we will not be able to speak with any Arab countries, and it will be the end of negotiations. And look where we are today, 2 years after. So I think we can be optimistic about that. It will definitely help us in pushing other countries. I want to remind you that we got the US to move the embassy. I was personally involved in that project, and also Guatemala that followed the US and moved the embassy to Jerusalem. And now we are waiting for other countries like Honduras and some other Eastern European countries. So I'm very involved on that, and I will continue to push regardless of where I am to make it happen. And I can assure you that once it will happen, people will ask themselves why it was such a big issue for so many years, you know? What's the big deal about it?
Right.
And I hope it will happen soon.
We certainly support that. One of the questions from our audience is, I think, something in people's minds, and that is the other part of the UAE-Israel agreement, which has to do with arms sales. There's been a lot of speculation about whether the US will sell F-35 bombers. Do you have any sense of whether Israel has any control over that, any say in that, or the right to put in the agreement that can't happen?
So Prime Minister Netanyahu said very clearly that there was no attachment to the agreement. And we have to remember that we are grateful that in the US, they passed legislation, the QME, a Qualitative Military Edge. It passed in 2008, and it actually guarantees that we will have the edge. And before any sale of arms to any Arab country in the region, there is a process of consultation. So we have great bipartisan relation, and we have a lot of friends in Washington, D.C., and I'm sure we will see them doing the same consultation, and I'm sure they will make sure that we will have that edge. In the past, I can tell you that, you know, we had similar issues about other aircrafts. If we want to look what happened in the past, the US sold the aircraft they wanted, but the technology or the equipment was in a different level. So they kept the edge, and then we had the ability to keep our advantage, which is important for us, and it's important for the US.
You accomplished a lot at the UN, it's obvious, and we were thrilled to watch you and Nikki Haley as a dynamo duo. However, the UN does have a lot of very hostile committees and resolutions against Israel. I guess the most notable is at the UN Human Rights Council, which isn't about human rights. So is the UN helpful to Israel? Is Israel benefiting from participating? Some of us feel the UN itself is just archaic and too anti-Israel to even be considered.
So indeed, the UN is a hostile place, but I prove that we can change that. I prove we can add things to the agenda, whether it's a resolution condemning Hamas, a resolution against anti-Semitism. So we can actually add more things to the agenda, and that's what we did. At the same time, when you look at the UN institutions and administration, they have to be more focused. You know, take for example the presence of the UNIFIL peacekeeping troops on the border with Lebanon. 10,000 soldiers. It cost hundreds of millions of dollars every year. And only a few days ago, we saw that Hezbollah was actually hiding behind the UN post to shoot Israeli targets. So they have to change. They have to do a better job with their money, and they have to look back at the charter of the UN. It is a good charter, but the implementation, it's a bad implementation.
So I think this might be maybe the last question, I don't know, but we are mostly a Canadian audience. Canada has not demonstrated as much friendliness and closeness to Israel in the recent years. Can Canada play a role? Do you see Canada playing a role in helping to extend diplomatic relationships for Israel with countries in Africa, Asia, the Middle East? Is there a role for us?
Sure. Canada is a strong friend of Israel still, and we appreciate it. We are sorry that they didn't win the race to the Security Council. Part of it was because they were blamed that they support Israel. So, you know, in the last year, maybe they tried to show that they are more objective. It didn't help the results, and the campaign against Canada was that they support Israel. But I'm sure, you know, they have a lot of connections, and I'm sure that now when things are opening up in Africa, in the Gulf, I'm sure Canada will take a major part in that.
I do have another question. Most people have focused on the Arab Muslim countries in terms of expanding relationships, but there are many Muslim countries that are not Arabic. Particularly one I always found most hostile in a crazy way is Pakistan. But there is actually a new Jewish community in Pakistan. I don't know if you are aware of that. So my question is there a possibility of relations expanding with Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, and some of the other Muslim countries, never mind Arabic?
So I worked with many of those countries that you mentioned, and for them there were always some sensitivity. I think now that we are opening embassies with more Muslim countries, it will allow us to do things publicly, which is very important for us economically. So when you look at the numbers of Indonesia, for example, it's a huge market for us, and today it's closed for Israelis. You know, we can travel there, but with many restrictions, and we cannot do things very easily. So I think it will be great for them, first of all, to be exposed to Israel and our innovation technology, and also great for us. So I think it will be part of the new things we can bring up in the future.
Thank you. And the last question really will be, will the Palestinian Arabs come on board as Israel expands these relationships?
So I'm not optimistic. You know, I met President Abbas in the Security Council dozens of times, and I always told him, why do you come to the UN? Why you don't negotiate with us? And I don't think that with him it will go anywhere. I think we will have to wait for a new leader to emerge, someone like Anwar Sadat of Egypt, that will lead the Palestinians to a better future. And today they choose to deal with the hatred for Israel rather than to advance the lives of the Palestinians, which is unfortunate. But that is the reality, that the leadership they have today. And I pray for them that they will have new leaders.
May I ask a question, Andrea?
Yes.
Danny, how do we reassure people who are very worried about what they think is the cancellation of sovereignty, what I consider a postponement? When can we expect a change in applying sovereignty from the river to the sea?
So I don't know to tell you when, and also we have to look into the political situation in the US and in Israel. Here we have a unity government, which is barely functioning. We saw that last week we almost went to another elections, 4 elections in 18 months. So now they postponed it until December. So I think first, if we would have like a government that will have a strong position about this issue, that will be the first stage. And I want to conclude with my main point. This decision is the decision of the Israeli government, period. We don't need to get permission from anyone else. We have to reach a decision ourselves, and then we can explain it. We can deal with the UN, we can deal with the EU, we will deal with everybody. But at the end of the day, it's a decision of the Israeli government in Jerusalem. So I think it has to do with the political situation in Israel, but I'm optimistic because when you look, Goldie, what happened in the last few years, the public in Israel shifted to our position. The parties in Israel shifted to our positions. When you look at parties from the left, like the Labour Party, it vanished. Meretz Party, there are 5 seats. So today you have right-wing parties and central parties. So I think it's shifting to our direction.
Thank you. I'm now going to ask Lance to do the wrap-up.
Thank you.
Thank you. The Allgemeiner recently wrote, quote, "The progress made by Ambassador Danon at the UN has come as a product of good old-fashioned grit, creativity, and the inner confidence in the justness of the Jewish state's cause that Danon projects." So everybody, I think from today's presentation, we obtained a glimpse into Ambassador Danon's passion and deep devotion to the state of Israel. Thank you, Ambassador, for your time. It is very important to ensure there is an open line of communication between diaspora Jewry and Israeli leadership. As time is short, I will simply say from all of us, Toda Rabah for your presentation and your decades of service. Thank you to the Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights, the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation, and all of the sponsors for organizing this event. Everybody, have a wonderful day, and thank you again, Ambassador Danon.
Thank you very much. Shana Tova and Happy New Year to you.
Shana Tova.